The day Garrett Walsh told me I needed to understand my position in the company, I finally did. I understood that 22 years of keeping cybersecurity systems alive through countless attacks were worth less to them than a polished MBA. I understood that loyalty only mattered as long as I stayed quiet. And I understood that sometimes the only way a company sees the value of a woman is by losing her at the exact moment they need her most. You need to understand your position in this organization. Rachel. Garrett Walsh said it without even looking directly at me. He kept his head down, adjusting the papers on the table, aligning each edge as if the neatness of those documents mattered more than the woman sitting across from him. I still remember that conference room on the third floor of Summit Dynamics, where the air conditioner rattled without cooling anything, and the stale smell of burnt coffee clung to the room like old fatigue. My name is Rachel Sullivan. I was 49 years old, and I had spent 22 years keeping that company's cybersecurity infrastructure from collapsing. I walked into that room thinking it would be another routine compensation review. Another dry conversation between human resources and a long-serving employee. But within minutes, I realized I was not just hearing about salary. I was hearing a cold valuation of my youth, my experience, my loyalty, and all the sleepless nights I had given them. Garrett slid the paper toward me in a voice so flat it sounded rehearsed. It listed my title as Senior Infrastructure Architect, my 22-year service record, and a merit increase of 2.8%. Underneath, in smaller print, he was a line saying my compensation had been aligned with internal equity standards. I had seen that phrase too many times. It did not mean fairness. It meant the company had decided what I was worth, and they expected me to be disciplined enough not to argue. I sat still and listened to my heartbeat slow down. The Navy had taught me how to remain calm under pressure, but no training had prepared me for the quiet violence of being undervalued by the very place I had protected for more than 2 decades. I rested my finger on the number and asked, almost under my breath. 2.8%, Garrett nodded, and said it fell within the standard range for senior technical staff. I leaned back in the chair and studied his face. Still professionally empty. In my mind, I saw Jason Reed, a man who had joined the company less than a year earlier with the impressive title of Director of Security Strategy. Despite never having personally handled a real intrusion inside our systems, I asked Garrett about Jason. The pen in his hand stopped for one small beat. Just long enough for me to know I had touched the part they did not want to discuss. He said he could not talk about another employee's compensation. I looked straight at him and asked whether Jason was making nearly twice my salary. Garrett did not answer directly. He said Jason had an MBA from a prestigious school, strategic vision, and the ability to align with executive objectives. I let those words hang between us. Strategic vision, executive objectives, prestigious credentials. In the Navy, competence was not measured by how smoothly someone spoke in a meeting. Competence meant that when communications failed in rough seas, you could fix them. It meant that when hostile actors probed your network, you could detect them. It meant that when people depended on a signal to survive, you kept that channel alive. I told Garrett I had built nearly every security layer Summit operated. Stopped multiple attacks that could have paralyzed the company, and saved them millions in avoided penalties and downtime. Jason had a degree. Garrett replied that leadership roles were benchmarked differently from technical roles. I heard the real message beneath his polished language. My expertise was valuable only while I stayed quiet and did the work, while someone else's title was worth more, because it looked better in the boardroom. I did not raise my voice. I did not tremble. After years of incident response, I knew the most dangerous moments were rarely loud. I told Garrett I wanted to clarify what I was hearing. Was he saying that someone who did not understand our infrastructure had never protected this system during a real attack, and had contributed nothing to the defenses? Keeping it alive was worth almost twice what I was. Garrett folded his hands on the table with the controlled calm of a man used to hiding unfairness behind human resources language. He repeated phrases about market data, compensation benchmarking, leadership roles, and credentials. I heard every word, but my mind moved to more ordinary things. Emily and Noah's college tuition, the support payments I still sent David after the divorce, health insurance premiums that kept rising, the retirement account that had taken a hit, and the fact that at 49, I should have been in the strongest earning years of my career. I opened my bag and pulled out one folded sheet of paper. Garrett tensed slightly, probably expecting a grievance or legal complaint. It was neither. It was my resignation letter. I placed it on top of his compensation document. When his eyes reached the first line, the color drained from his face. The letter stated that I was resigning from my position as Senior Infrastructure Architect at Summit Dynamics, effective immediately. I added that a copy had been sent to his inbox at 9:04 that morning, along with copies to my direct manager, the CTO, and the Vice President of Operations. He told me I did not need to decide right away, that I could sleep on it, that the company could revisit the numbers. I stood and told him I had been sleeping on it for 22 years. This was me waking up. If you have ever been undervalued the way I was? Comment number 1. So I know you understand what it feels like to reclaim your own worth. I walked out of the conference room with my bag on my shoulder, leaving Garrett behind with a resignation letter he could not undo. The click of the door closing behind me was quiet, but to me it was the clearest sound I had heard in years. Before I explain why 36 minutes later the CEO of Summit was standing outside my apartment begging me to come back, I need to return to the beginning. I did not come from leather chairs, executive meetings, and glossy presentations. I studied computer science at a state university with support earned through military service. Before that, I had spent 6 years in the Navy working on ship-based communication systems. That environment taught me something. The executive world later seemed determined to forget. Systems do not exist to decorate reports. Systems exist so people can survive, work, communicate, and make decisions in moments where mistakes have consequences. When radar fails in a storm, no one cares whether you sound confident. When encrypted communications break in dangerous waters, no one asks what school you attended. They only need to know whether you can fix it. I joined Summit Dynamics in the early 2000s, when it was still a mid-sized defense contractor trying to compete with companies many times its size. On paper, Summit provided cybersecurity solutions for government agencies and critical infrastructure. In reality, it operated a mess of aging systems, outdated protocols, manual processes, and the fragile hope of a few exhausted engineers. The person who interviewed me was Harold Bennett, the former CTO, a man who had done real technical work before moving into management. He pointed at a whiteboard covered in network diagrams that looked like an accident scene and asked whether I could keep it from falling apart. I asked whether I would be allowed to truly fix things or merely put out fires. He said if I could justify the changes, I could make them. That afternoon, I was hired. During my first month, I barely changed anything. I joined incident calls, read postmortem reports, trace network flows, and talk to engineers who had been there long enough to know where every crack was hidden beneath the fresh paint. I recognized the pattern quickly. The company only reacted after fires started, had no serious proactive monitoring, and relied on documentation that was either missing or dangerously wrong. In the second month, I began recording failure patterns, not theoretical vulnerabilities written to make reports look impressive, but real failures that had actually happened. What broke, why it broke, what warning signs appeared, and whether the fix solved the root problem or simply moved the disaster into the following week. I kept a paper notebook, not because I was old-fashioned, but because I had seen too many digital records disappear when budgets changed, servers moved, or leadership decided a folder no longer matched the current priorities. By the third month, I had identified 15 serious vulnerabilities in the infrastructure. I quantified the risk, estimated the cost of repair against the cost of failure, and presented it to Harold. He asked one question: what would it take to fix all of it? I said it would take 12 months of focused work and the authority to push back when someone wanted shortcuts. He gave me both. I rebuilt the monitoring environment first, because you cannot fix what you cannot see. I created dashboards that showed not only whether systems were alive, but how close they were to failing. Error rates, degradation trends, capacity projections, early warning signs. Then I rebuilt security protocols, redundancy, automated failover, and comprehensive logging. If this story makes you believe quiet technical workers deserve more recognition, please like this video. For the first several years, I truly believed things would work out. The company grew. Government contracts multiplied. The infrastructure became more complex. And revenue climbed from the tens of millions to well over 100 million during my tenure. Executives were pleased. The board was satisfied. And directors received their bonuses. I received a small raise and a coffee mug joking that I was the most valuable player. I did not complain. Not because it did not hurt, but because I believed in a slow kind of fairness. I believed that steady competence would eventually be recognized, that the person keeping the ship from sinking would one day be invited on deck instead of left below in the engine room. My first mistake was believing that for too long. The real shift began about 3 years earlier when Summit decided to professionalize its leadership structure. That was the phrase Stephen Blake, the new CEO brought in by the board from the tech world, used during an all-hands meeting. Stephen liked words such as synergy, digital transformation, and strategic realignment. He did not like phrases such as technical debt, legacy systems, or this will break if we do not address it first. Within months, hiring changed completely. Summit cared less about people who understood how systems worked and more about people who could make those systems sound impressive in meetings. We got directors who had never written a line of code, vice presidents who spoke beautifully about operational excellence but could not explain what a firewall did, and consultants charging enormous rates to rename old problems with new terminology. Then Jason Reed arrived. He had an MBA from a prestigious school, several years in strategy consulting, and no real cybersecurity background. His title was Director of Security Strategy. His actual function was to turn the work people like me did into digestible slides for leadership. I discovered the pay gap by accident, and the shock of it felt almost physical. That day, I was searching for a technical document Ethan Walsh had promised to upload to our internal repository. I clicked the wrong file in a shared folder with careless permissions. It was Jason Reed's offer letter. Base salary of $164,000. Signing bonus of $25,000. Annual bonus target of 20%. Stock options totaling 15,000 shares. I stared at those numbers for a long time. Not because I could not do the math, but because I could do it too well. Then, I opened my most recent pay statement. Base salary of $89,200. No signing bonus. Annual bonus target of 5%. Which I had actually received in full only twice in 22 years. Stock options for my original offer, with almost nothing added since. Jason had been at Summit for 8 months, did not understand the systems, and had never saved the company from an attack. Yet he was being paid so much more that the difference no longer felt like an oversight. It felt like a declaration. I closed both files and sat in my cubicle for a long time. Around me, keyboards clicked. Phones rang, and coworkers discussed projects, but I felt as if I were watching everything through thick glass. That evening, in my empty apartment after the divorce, I did something I had avoided for years. I updated my resume properly. I documented every system I had built, every crisis I had prevented, and every innovation that had reduced risk or saved Summit money. The list was longer than I expected. The intrusion detection system that caught a state-backed attack, the network segmentation project that stopped ransomware from spreading, the encryption upgrade that kept us compliant with new federal requirements. I sent my resume to 3 recruiters who had contacted me over the years. Within less than 2 days, my phone began ringing. Within a few weeks, I had more serious offers than all the vague promises Summit had given me in years. The one I accepted came from Iron Gate Security Principal Security Architect. Base salary of $148,000. Bonus target of 18%. And stock options that actually meant something. All I needed was one clear moment to walk away from Summit without looking back. Garrett gave me that moment with the very sentence telling me to understand my position. After I left the conference room, everything moved quickly in a way that felt almost cold. Around 9:12, My security badge was flagged for deactivation. Around 9:18, my access across dozens of production environments began to be revoked. Around 9:23, I had cleared my desk, taken my extra monitor, a few personal items, and the coffee mug with the technical joke I used to love. 4 coworkers saw me walk by, but every one of them suddenly became deeply interested in their keyboards. I did not blame them. In companies like Summit, people learn not to look too long at someone stepping out of line, because they may see their own future. Minutes later, the first critical alert began screaming. Most outsiders do not understand that complex cybersecurity infrastructure is not like a car where you open the hood and see the broken part. It is more like a human body, with systems depending on each other in ways that are not always visible. When one part malfunctions, symptoms can appear anywhere. To find the root cause, you have to know where the body has hurt before, how it healed, and which small scars are actually holding it together. If you want to keep following stories about value, silence, and the cost of dismissing expertise, subscribe to the channel now. The first failure was not a clean collapse that anyone could easily recognize. It was subtler and more dangerous. The primary intrusion detection system began producing cascading errors while still functioning just enough to fool inexperienced eyes into thinking it was only temporarily overloaded. False positive rates increased. Threat detection accuracy declined, and response times stretched little by little. It was the kind of failure that encourages bad decisions because it does not scream that it is dying. It whispers. And if you have never heard that whisper before, you miss it. I had seen that issue exactly once, more than a year earlier. During a heavy attack simulation with an unusual load profile, it was a memory leak in the threat analysis engine, triggered only by a rare combination of network traffic and data processing patterns. At the time, I had fixed it quietly, rewritten monitoring queries, recorded early detection steps in my paper notebook, and moved on to the next crisis. That notebook was now in the trunk of my car. Summit did not know it existed, because for years they had never really asked what I knew. They only called when something caught fire. Ethan Walsh, the young engineer I had been mentoring, was on call that day. He was just over 26, with less than 2 years of experience. Smart and hardworking, but not yet exposed to the strange failure modes Summit systems had accumulated over time. Ethan opened the runbook I had written years earlier. It helped with normal incidents. But this was not normal. He did what a young engineer should do: checked logs, compared metrics, escalated the issue. But some things cannot be solved by documentation alone. They require memory, experience, and someone who has seen the monster before it changes masks. Ethan escalated to Claire Martinez, a senior security analyst. Claire was good, dedicated, experienced, and one of the few people at Summit who genuinely respected systems instead of just titles. I can imagine her opening multiple terminal windows, combing through logs layer by layer, comparing response times, false positive rates, and deviations in the analysis model. Claire could see the symptoms clearly, but the cause remained behind a wall of memory. Summit had allowed me to carry out the door. By mid-morning, Jason Reed walked into the operations center. I was not there, but Claire later described it, and I could picture the scene: almost perfectly pressed shirt, neat khakis, and the confident smile of someone who believed every technical problem could be solved with a management question. He asked why the dashboard was red. Claire said they were investigating a performance issue with the intrusion detection system. Jason asked why they did not just restart it. To a non-security person, that may sound reasonable. To us, it sounded like a surgeon saying to cut something out before knowing what it was. Restarting at the wrong moment could erase critical logs, trigger cascading failures in dependent systems, or hide evidence of a real attack. Claire explained that they needed to identify the root cause first. Jason became impatient and called Stephen Blake. Stephen arrived quickly, the way CEOs do, when dashboards turn red and government customers start asking questions. His first question was where Rachel was. Jason replied that I had resigned that morning over a compensation issue. I did not see Stephen's face, but I did not need to. A man who believed he controlled everything had just discovered that the most important piece had been pushed out by his own company. 36 minutes after I placed my resignation letter on Garrett's desk, Stephen was standing outside my apartment. When I opened the door, Stephen Blake no longer looked perfectly composed. His tie was loose. His suit was wrinkled. His hair was slightly disordered. And his eyes carried a strain I had never seen in strategy meetings. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He said they needed me back immediately. I stood behind the partly open door, one hand still on the handle, and told him I did not work there anymore. Stephen said he knew, but the defense contract systems were paralyzed. The Pentagon was asking questions. Classified data could not be processed. And no one understood what was happening. I listened without the satisfaction many people might imagine. What I felt was colder and sadder. Not sadness for Stephen, but sadness for the 22 years I had spent, proving my value over and over to people who only recognized it when they lost access to it. He offered to pay me as a consultant for the day, whatever rate I wanted. I looked at him and said no. Stephen asked why. I told him that 36 minutes earlier, his company had made it very clear what I was worth to them. Now they could learn what their systems were worth without me. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Stephen knocked a few more times, each round more desperate than the last. Then his footsteps faded down the hallway. I made coffee, sat at my table, and continued filling out onboarding paperwork for Irongate Security. My phone buzzed constantly, text messages, missed calls, alerts from an emergency incident channel someone had added me to despite my revoked access. I let all of it pass. Not because I was irresponsible. I had been responsible for too long on behalf of a company that refused to be responsible to me. The outage lasted 16 hours. I did not watch it unfold live. But Claire later told me enough after everything settled. By early afternoon, 3 major government contracts were at serious risk. A defense agency sent a formal inquiry about service disruption. An energy agency warned that Summit's security review could be suspended pending investigation. 2 state governments activated backup protocols, which meant they were temporarily no longer treating Summit as their primary security contractor. By late afternoon, Stephen called in an emergency consulting firm that specialized in infrastructure crisis response. The lead consultant spent hours examining the systems before finally saying what no one wanted to admit without the original architect. Fully understanding and stabilizing the environment could take days or even weeks. Mark Ellison, the current CTO, that was the only person honest enough to tell Stephen that the company was not dead in the water because one engineer quit. It was dead in the water because it had treated that engineer as if she did not matter. And now they were learning what happened when she was no longer there to save them. The consulting team worked through the night, brought in multiple specialists, set up a war room, and traced layer after layer of infrastructure. Their hourly bill climbed fast before they had even identified the cause. The breakthrough came after midnight, when Ethan remembered something I had mentioned in passing months earlier. There was an old wiki page buried deep inside the knowledge base, written by me after a similar incident. It took him several more hours to find it. But when he opened it, everything was there: the memory leak, the monitoring queries, and the recovery sequence needed to avoid secondary failures. Ethan followed the steps. The system stabilized. The consultants sent a bill of more than $120,000. The incident was over. But the real damage was just beginning. The next 8 months were a period in which I watched Summit from the safe distance of my new job. Within the first week, 2 major defense contracts worth a combined total of more than $50 million were terminated. The government security review cited troubling gaps in institutional knowledge management and retention of key personnel. In plain language, they had noticed that Summit allowed the person who understood the system best to walk out with no viable replacement plan. Stephen called an emergency board meeting. Several executives were asked to pursue other opportunities. The polite phrase for being pushed out. Jason Reed was moved into a strategic advisory role with no budget, no team, and no real power. Garrett Walsh was terminated under the language of organizational restructuring. But everyone understood he had turned a fixable compensation gap into a crisis costing tens of millions of dollars. 3 weeks after the incident, Mark Ellison sent me an email. The tone was professional, cautious, and probably revised several times before he pressed send. He offered a base salary of $145,000, an annual bonus target of 15%, a promotion to principal security architect, and direct reporting to him instead of through the executive layer. One sentence made me pause. "We know we failed you, and I am asking for a chance to make it right." I read it 3 times. Then I replied that I appreciated the offer. But I had already started at my new company and was happy there. I wished them success, rebuilding their security program. It was not an angry response. It was the response of someone who finally understood that not every regret deserves the return of what it once undervalued. I truly was happy at Irongate Security. And the most surprising part was that it was not only about money. Yes, the salary was much better. Yes, the bonus and stock options made me feel, for the first time in years, that I was not living only to pay bills. But what relieved me most was respect I did not have to beg for. During my final interview, Dr. Patricia Morgan, Irongate CTO, asked me about the worst incident I had ever handled. I told her about the state-backed attack I had stopped, how I traced the intrusion through multiple network segments and closed the vulnerability before classified data could be accessed. Patricia did not interrupt me to ask how the business impact had been presented. She listened like an engineer, listening to another engineer describe a real battle. Then she said that if I joined Irongate, that kind of knowledge would not be locked inside one person's head or a private notebook. It would be documented, shared, and turned into process. Because the company had learned that talented people could leave, and the organization had to retain the knowledge needed to survive, without relying on one person's silent sacrifice. On my first day, Patricia introduced me to the security team in words I still remember clearly. She said I had more real-world incident response experience than most of them combined. And when I said something about security, they should listen because that authority had been earned through 22 years of keeping critical systems running. There was no phrase like "just technical," no dismissive smile, no reminder to understand my position. For the first time in a long time, I walked into a meeting room without making myself smaller to keep others comfortable. During my first 6 months at Irongate, I rebuilt their monitoring infrastructure using everything I had learned during my painful years at Summit. But this time I did it in a more sustainable way. Every architectural decision came with documentation. Every exception had a reason, a review date, and an owner. Every important query was shared, tested, and taught. I did not try to become the only person with the answer, because I finally understood that this was not real power. Real power is building a system that does not collapse when one person takes time off, changes jobs, gets sick, or simply no longer wants to be the permanent firefighter. Within a year, I had trained 4 engineers who could handle major incidents independently. I felt a different kind of pride when they found root causes themselves, proposed fixes, and invited me to challenge their thinking, instead of calling me in to rescue them. When my first annual review came around, Patricia called me into her office. I had prepared myself for a polite conversation with generic praise. Instead, she told me I had exceeded every expectation. My base salary was raised to $165,000. I received the full 18% bonus, and the board approved additional retention stock options. I said I had not even been there a full year. Patricia replied that this was exactly why they did not wait until I was walking out the door to recognize my value. 2 years after I left Summit, Mark Ellison sent another email with a subject line about a consulting opportunity. Summit was still struggling. They had hired multiple security architects to replace me. But some left and others could not fully reconstruct the old institutional knowledge. They wanted to bring me in as an external consultant for quarterly security reviews, architecture, OD, and knowledge transfer sessions. The rate was $285 per hour. I thought for 3 days before answering Mark. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately on principle. Another part wondered whether Summit had truly learned anything. or whether they were simply trying to buy back something they had once disrespected when it was cheaper. I called Patricia and told her the whole situation. She did not tell me to accept or decline. She simply asked whether I wanted to help them. I said part of me wanted to say no to protect my pride. But another part thought that if they were genuinely changing how they treated technical people, maybe I should help. Patricia said that if they were willing to pay me what I was worth and sincerely change, then helping them would not be about whether they deserved it. It would be about whether I wanted to live by my own standards. I accepted the consulting contract. The first session was with the executive team, Stephen, Mark, and the new board chair. I opened one slide only: the real cost of undervaluing technical expertise. I did not speak with bitterness. I spoke like someone who had spent her life watching systems fail when people with authority refused to listen to people with expertise. I walked them through the incident, what failed, why it failed, why someone with an MBA but no cybersecurity foundation could not have prevented it, and why someone carrying 22 years of institutional memory could recognize the warning signs before it was too late. Then I showed them the financial impact: lost contracts, response costs, emergency consulting fees, penalties, reputational damage. The total was more than $65 million. All of it began because they did not want to pay roughly $30,000 more per year to the person who had kept the system alive. Stephen stared at the slide for a long time. Finally, he said they had made a catastrophic mistake. I said yes. They had. After the presentation, the board chair asked what I would do first if I were starting over at Summit. I answered without hesitation: apologize. Not a quiet apology in a private email, not a half-written statement from communications, but a public apology to the technical people who had been treated like costs instead of foundations. And that apology had to come with real change. Otherwise, it would only be another performance. I spent the next several hours teaching them what IronGate had done right, valuing technical expertise as a strategic asset, building career paths for people who did not want to become managers, creating retention mechanisms before strong employees burned out, documenting institutional knowledge without punishing the people who held it, and most importantly, bringing technical experts to the decision table before decisions were packaged as mandates. 2 weeks later, Stephen sent an all-hands email. Claire forwarded it to me with a short note saying I might want to see it. In the email, Stephen admitted that 2 years earlier, they had lost their most experienced security architect because they failed to recognize her value. He wrote that the failure had cost the company contracts, credibility, and the respect of its technical staff. He said changes to compensation, retention, and knowledge management would mean nothing if they did not acknowledge what they had done wrong. I read the email in silence. It did not erase the years I had been undervalued. It did not make me want to return. But it gave me a sense of closure. Not because they had finally praised me, but because they had been forced to say out loud the truth. I had known for a long time I had never been low value. I had simply stayed too long in the wrong place. Today, I am still at IronGate Security. My title is Distinguished Security Engineer, the highest technical role in the company. My base salary is $182,000. Last year, my bonus was $38,000. When the company eventually goes public, my stock options may give me the choice of early retirement. But if I only talk about money, the story becomes too small. Money matters, especially to a woman who once sat alone in her apartment calculating college tuition, post-divorce support, insurance, and retirement, while the company she saved every day paid her as if she were easy to replace. But what changed my life more deeply was the feeling of being heard. When I say a system is close to breaking, no one calls me negative. They ask what is needed to fix it. When I document a vulnerability, it does not disappear into a folder, waiting for review. It becomes required reading. When I suggest slowing down to do something correctly, no one looks at me as if I am blocking growth. They understand that slowing down for one day to prevent a week-long collapse is a sound business decision, not technical stubbornness. I have also learned to treat myself differently. I used to believe that if I worked well enough, long enough, and saved the company often enough, People would eventually notice. Now I know silence is not always a virtue. Sometimes it is a box other people build around you so you stop asking for more. I still love security work. I still enjoy solving hard problems. I still feel proud when systems stay stable through a dangerous night. But I no longer confuse dedication with an obligation to accept less. The greatest lesson I took from that day was not about revenge. In truth, I do not think I took revenge at all. I simply left. I simply refused to keep discounting my expertise for people who had been given enough time to understand it. When someone tells you that you need to understand your position, to believe them, they are showing you exactly where they have placed you in their minds. It may not be the position you deserve, but it is the position they have chosen for you. And once you see that, you have two choices: stay and hope that someday they change their minds, or step outside and find a place that does not need to lose you before it knows what you are worth. I am not saying leaving is easy. For me, it came with real fear. I was the mother of 2 children in college. I had bills, responsibilities, age, and memories of a job market that is not always kind to women nearing 50 in technical fields. I asked myself whether I was too late, too stubborn, or whether I should swallow one more insult. But then I looked at everything I had done over 22 years and understood that if I did not stand on the side of my own value, I could not blame others for bargaining it down. When Stephen stood outside my door 36 minutes after I resigned, it was not victory in any joyful sense. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the system had always needed me more than they admitted. Confirmation that my expertise did not suddenly become valuable when I walked away. It had always been valuable. Summit simply wanted to enjoy that value cheaply, until it no longer could. Some companies only learn through loss. They do not believe warnings, risk reports, or the quiet nights when employees fix problems before customers wake up. They believe when contracts are canceled, when government clients call, when emergency consulting invoices land on the table, and when dashboards glow red, while the one person who understood why has locked her apartment door from the inside. I am not telling this story to encourage anyone to quit in anger. I am telling it because many people, especially women in quiet technical roles, have grown used to being called reliable without being called leaders, given responsibility without being given authority, asked to save emergencies without being paid fairly. If you are one of them, I want you to remember that your value does not live inside a salary number chosen by human resources, nor in the eyes of a manager who only seeks you out during a crisis. Your value lives in your real capability, in the problems you have solved, in the systems that stand because of you, and in the calm you bring when everyone else panics. The right people will recognize that while you are still in the room, not only after you have walked out, and if one day you must place a resignation letter on the table, do it not to destroy anyone, but to save yourself from being worn down further. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If Rachel's story reminded you of yourself or someone quietly carrying an entire system without recognition, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below.